Chapter 1138. Lin Yun hung up the phone. She wanted to grab the man on top of her, but how could Zhao Yi let her go so easily? He had only eaten meat once this week. He pressed her down from behind and kissed her neck. His voice was low and husky. Yun, come from behind. He liked to look at his wife's exquisite figure. He liked to stick to her back, stick his face to her face, and watch her aroused look. Moreover, he knew that she liked it too. On the other side, Tang Yu was in his early 30s. He was having a lively sex education class. He hung up the phone and smiled. In his heart, he thought that Uncle Zhao had just gotten married at an old age. It was understandable that he was not restrained in that aspect. Especially once, when Zhao Yi had a meal with him and drank too much, he complained to him that his Yun was obsessed with Buddhist scriptures and not his body. Tang Yu remembered that Zhao Yi often talked about Buddhist scriptures with his mother for more than 10 years. So it was all a fake hobby. It turned out that all men were the same. At this moment, Tang Yu smiled and called Pei Chi. Xiaoxin was crying so sadly. That silly girl must be very angry. Although he had considered Lin Yun's words and felt that it was inappropriate to raise Chi as a daughter, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was better to raise her as a daughter. He called her number. She picked up quickly, but her voice was a little soft. She must have been crying. Tang Yu's heart was sour and sweet at the same time. Are you angry with Xiaoxin? On the other side, Pei Chi snorted softly. How did you know? Tang Yu smiled. Mom said it. Mom said that it's not good for me to raise you as a daughter. Pei Chi said in a muffled voice, you're a pervert. He smiled. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in City A, he missed her a little. His voice became deeper. Chi, I miss you very much. Instead of comforting her, he said that he missed her. From Tang Yu's point of view, the conflict between Pei Chi and Xiaoxin was not a conflict at all, instead it was somewhat funny. But even though Chi was raised to be spoiled by him, she was still an adult and would only get angry if Xiaoxin did not do well. Just take it as their breaking in period. Little girls would always play around when they were together. Pei Chi asked him gloomily, are you coming back the day after tomorrow? He replied casually and then asked softly, did you miss me? Actually, she wanted to, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Tang Yu looked at the dark night and listened to her shallow breathing. He smiled. Chi, sleep early. She gave an oh, but in her heart, she was thinking, that's it. But that was it. He said goodnight and waited for her to hang up. Pei Chi was a little disappointed, but she still hung up the phone obediently. For a long time, Pei Chi lay on the bed, unable to fall asleep. She took out her cell phone. Should she call him or not? In the end, she still dialed his number. Tang Yu just responded with a and she quickly said, I miss you too. After saying that, she quickly hung up. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, then he smiled. His Chi would always be the cutest girl in his life. This time, it was his turn to be unable to sleep. He felt that he had an inexhaustible amount of energy, so he went to the gym attached to the suite and vented his excess energy, but how could he endure it after not having done it for 2 years? He really couldn't take it anymore and went to the bathroom to relieve himself. Chapter 1139. Early the next morning, Pei Chi wondered if Xiaoxin was still unhappy, so she picked up Tang Yu's number and called her. It was Lin Yun who answered. Her tone was a little funny, and she talked a lot with Pei Chi. Pei Chi felt a little embarrassed because she was at odds with a child, and the child was her own daughter. But she also knew that it was because of her memory loss that caused the relationship between her and Xiaoxin to be different from a normal mother-daughter relationship. She wasn't really angry, but she wanted to correct Xiaoxin's bad behavior. The child was too smart, and it was not good for her to be harmed. However, children were very forgetful. When Xiaoxin talked to her, she had long forgotten about yesterday's incident. Pei Qiqi let out a sigh of relief. Actually, Xiaoxin thought that her daddy would agree to spank Qiqi's little butt when she came back. But her daddy also said that he would spank her little butt. Xiaoxin felt that it was fair, so she was happy. But Xiaoxin didn't tell Qiqi about this, because Xiaoxin had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. After getting Xiaoxin's forgiveness, Pei Qiqi felt like it was windy when she walked to work. First, she went to the magazine office to prepare the information for the interview with Yi Liangqiu. Then, she carried her camera and was just about to go out when she bumped into Pei Huan. Pei Huan was now like the lady boss of Beauty magazine. In the past, she always came to look for Lao Can, but this time, it was obviously not the case. She came to look for Pei Qiqi, and she even brought someone with her, Xiaomei. How can you go alone? Pei Huan looked at Pei Qiqi and rolled her eyes. Do you know how famous Yi Liangqiu is? Pei Qiqi gave her a dumbfounded look. Pei Huan waved her hand. Forget it. Let me tell you, you idiot. Yi Liangqiu needs to bring 4 makeup artists, 8 bodyguards, and a manager to record a show. If you go alone, it would be a wonder if you don't get eaten up, little bunny. Pei Qiqi didn't understand. Did you know? You have to be a little more grandiose in order for her to feel valued. Otherwise, even if you go, it'll be a waste. She won't go one-on-one with you. She'll enjoy being the center of attention, understand? Pei Huan spoke until her saliva was dry. She picked up a cup of fruit tea that Pei Qiqi had placed on the table and gulped it down. Pei Qiqi was still dumbfounded as she looked at Pei Huan. After Pei Huan finished drinking, he began to get down to business. He beckoned for a few employees and little Mei to gather 8 people. Empress Yi will be satisfied with this arrangement, understand? Pei Qiqi nodded and then asked Pei Huan, you don't seem to like her. Pei Huan's neck and eyes were straight. She looked at Pei Qiqi for a long time before she sneered. Pei Qiqi, among the female stars in the entertainment industry, there aren't many who can compare to Yi Liangqiu. Pei Qiqi thought of the cold and cheerless Yi Liangqiu. She didn't seem to be as formidable as Pei Huan made her out to be. Little 7, you idiot. She can climb to this point, give birth to a dragon child, and is still being supported. If she doesn't have some tricks up her sleeve, do you think Qin Anlin won't strangle her to death? Pei Huan knew King Entertainment well, and she knew Qin Anlin even better. Yi Liangqiu wasn't an ordinary woman. If an ordinary woman went to attack Qin, she would have died on the way. Even that Shen Lian. Didn't Qin Anlin like her to death in the past? Didn't he fall out with her later? Chapter 1140. As Pei Huan spoke, Pei Qiqi nodded her head in a silly manner. In the end, the 8 of them went together. However, when they arrived at the reception room of King Entertainment, Amy and the others were stopped outside. Yi Liangqiu's bodyguard said expressionlessly, Miss Yi only wants to see Miss Pei alone. The rest of you can wait outside for a while. If Pei Huan was here, Pei Qiqi really wanted to tell her that this was what it meant to be pretentious. She turned around and gestured for Amy and the others to wait in the conference room while she pushed the door open and entered alone. Unexpectedly, only Yi Liangqiu and her agent were inside. After seeing Pei Qiqi, the agent even smiled and left to give them enough space. I want to interview you alone. Do you mind? Yi Liangqiu's voice was very calm. And the questions will be written by us. Previously, Pei Huan had said that Yi Liangqiu was strong and powerful, but Pei Qiqi didn't quite believe it. Because the Yi Liangqiu she had come into contact with was a mother, gentle and easygoing, and the Yi Liangqiu in front of her was her real self. Pei Chi sat down and took out her own manuscript and placed it on the table. She took Yi Liangqiu's manuscript and flipped through it. Her voice was very calm. This depends on whether our magazine is able to publish this interview with Miss Yi. She was almost sure that this interview wasn't simple. It might even be a little forceful. And the target was her marriage with Qin Anlin. She had no problem with it. Everything depended on Anlin. If Anlin wanted to, she could get a divorce immediately. However, she felt that Yi Liangqiu's actions would backfire and not be a smart move. She read a few lines at a time and looked up at Yi Liangqiu. Are you sure? Anlin isn't one to be threatened. All the answers to this question were written by Yi Liangqiu's side. The content was quite explosive. It was as if they were betting on Yi Liangqiu's halo. If Qin Anlin didn't admit it, then Yi Liangqiu would go to hell. Yi Liangqiu looked at Pei Chi and chuckled after a long time. Miss Pei, you know him very well. But I know him better. Pei Chi looked down. But Miss Yi, you missed something. She raised her eyes and looked at Yi Liangqiu. I have feelings for Anlin. I'm not a cold-blooded person. I don't want to hurt him. If you hurt him, you'll be able to live a happy life a long time ago. Is this not attractive to you? Yi Liangqiu's expression was still calm. Pei Chi let out a long sigh. Is this what you want? Then this isn't an interview, but an advertisement. Jiaren's fees are very expensive. I think there's no other place that would dare to publish Miss Ye's advertisement, right? Yi Liangqiu did not say anything. Pei Chi pushed the document back. 50 million. All right. Yi Liangqiu's tone was indifferent. She took out a check from her bag and placed it in front of Pei Chi. After a while, she said, I'm sorry, I just want to find a father for Mu Yun. On her face, there was a hint of sadness. She was also extremely beautiful. Sitting there, she was like an extremely beautiful painting. If Pei Chi's beauty was like an oil painting, then Yi Liangqiu's beauty was like the meticulous brushwork of traditional Chinese painting. She was beautiful and dignified, and every part of her was exquisite and beautiful. Pei Chi looked at the woman in front of her and was a little stunned. Combined with what Pei Huan said, there was no doubt that Yi Liangqiu was not telling the truth. She was wearing a mask. Chapter 1141. The corners of Yi Liangqiu's mouth curled up. She smiled faintly, her expression flawless. If I didn't know that you weren't Anlin's lover, Pei Chi, I would probably be thinking about how to deal with you. It was as if she was climbing to the top of King Entertainment step by step. Those who stood in her way were all cleared away by her. After Yi Liangqiu finished speaking, there was a look of determination in her eyes. This was Yi Liangqiu, the Yi Liangqiu that Pei Huan had spoken of. She didn't hide herself at all, exposing herself to Pei Chi. Pei Chi snapped out of her trance after a long while. Then, she smiled and turned on the camera to take a picture of her. Sensing Yi Liangqiu's resistance, Pei Chi's voice was a little cold. Miss Yi, I have my own insistence. I want to use the pictures I take, not those hard shots that you use to deal with the public. Yi Liangqiu was wearing a bohemian dress today. Her slightly curled long hair was let down casually. She had a languid beauty. Pei Chi carried the camera, feeling a little excited. What she had said just now was just a bluff. She was Yi Liangqiu's fangirl, and it was her dream to be able to take pictures of Yi Liangqiu. Moreover, she had a little something else in mind. Pei Chi directed Yi Liangqiu to put on the pose she wanted. At this moment, she was the master of Yi Liangqiu. Her aura was the same as when old Kan scolded Pei Huan to tears. She would yell at her if she didn't listen. Lie on the sofa, yes, look at the camera. Pei Chi narrowed one eye and then said impatiently, "Not the perfect expression is the most touching. I want to be direct, naked, and not this kind of dull expression." After a pause, Pei Chi roared, "What expression do you have when you lie on Qin Anlin? Imagine." In Yi Liangqiu's eyes, there was a hint of anger and helplessness. It was a good feeling. Pei Chi captured it and took a picture. She looked at the picture with the camera and was very satisfied. Yi Liangqiu's neck was a little stiff. She sat up straight and wanted to take a look, but Pei Chi didn't show her. Yi Liangqiu then realized that Pei Chi was a tough nut to crack. "I think you should know that I'm not doing this for money." Just for money, Pei Chi snorted lightly and said, "But you have to think carefully. If this thing fails, not only will you be hurt, but Mu Yun will also be hurt. He's still a child. Can he take so much?" Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. "Pei Chi, you don't know anything. Do you know that you're not my only enemy? There are countless women in King Entertainment." Pei Chi was stunned. She looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Perhaps I should thank you. Because of you, he has been clean these past 2 years. But Pei Chi, he will always let go of you because his heart softens. What will happen to him then? I think he will probably live a more indulgent life than before. And now is my best chance." Yi Liangqiu was taking a gamble. Just like every step she took in King Entertainment, she was taking a gamble. Pei Chi was stunned. She let out a long sigh and didn't say anything. She knew that after this was published, Qin Anlin would definitely blame her. But she would rather Anlin blame her than Yi Liangqiu. She would rather it be like this, because she had Qin Anlin so much, while Yi Liangqiu had given birth to Mu Yun without a name. Yi Liangqiu might be good at scheming, but in Pei Chi's eyes, this kind of scheming made one's heart ache. Yi Liangqiu was actually only 26 years old, but she had a 7-year-old child. When she and Qin Anlin got together, she wasn't even 20. Chapter 1142. 7 years. Yi Liangqiu had persevered for 7 years. She had waited for a man for 7 years. She deserved to be treated well. Pei Chi smiled faintly. Perhaps Anlin would be very happy. She kept her things and walked out, taking the check with her. When she reached the door, she heard a familiar voice behind her before she'd entered the elevator. "Chi." She froze for a moment and turned her head slowly. It was Qin Anlin. He looked at her and asked slowly, "Are you here to interview Yi Liangqiu?" Pei Chi replied with a and tightened her grip on the things in her hands. "Anlin, I have to go back to the club." There was not much expression on his face. With one hand in his pocket, he said slowly, "Don't you want to have lunch together?" Pei Chi had lived with him for 2 years. His subtle changes in expression could not fool her. She was a little wary and took a step back into the elevator. "Chi, this elevator has stopped." Qin Anlin's tone was even more indifferent as he walked forward slowly. Her little hands were behind her and her body was suddenly pressed against the wall of the elevator. At this moment, Pei Chi had a feeling that nothing Yi Liangqiu did could be hidden from Anlin. In fact, everything that Yi Liangqiu did was under Anlin's nose. Perhaps Anlin had already known about the contents of the draft. "Chi, let me take a look at the draft." Finally, he had forced her into a corner. His gaze was deep, but he did not take another step forward. Pei Chi bit her lip and looked up at him. "These are all very common questions. How can 50 million be a common question?" His handsome face was tinged with a hint of anger. He pressed her shoulder with one hand, not giving her a chance to struggle. He took her draft with the other hand and quickly skimmed through it. It was just as he had expected. Pei Chi looked up at him and said pitifully, "Anlin." After he finished reading, he still held her down with one hand, not giving her a chance to break free. His gaze was so heavy that it was almost dripping water. Pei Chi, don't tell me that these were written by you. I wrote it, for 50 million, she said boldly, and to divorce you. He sneered and narrowed his eyes at her. Pei Chi, I don't know when you've stopped being so kind. How could Qin Anlin not know Pei Chi? How could she write such a thing? But damn it, she wanted to publish this kind of thing to help Yi Liangqiu. Did he not exist in her heart at all? Even after losing her memory, she was still so sure that she loved Tang Yu. Qin Anlin's eyes were a little sad. He pressed her down, unwilling to let go of her. But he couldn't hurt her. After a long time, he murmured, Chi, don't you love me even a little? As he said that, he leaned forward and pressed his face into her neck. There was a vulnerability that he had never felt before. Because he felt that she was really going to leave him. Regarding the matter between him and Yi Liangqiu, she had handled it from the perspective of an outsider. She didn't feel any pain at all. She didn't feel pain at all. Her heart didn't ache for him at all. But Chi, I'm in pain. But this pain was caused by me. If I had known that I loved you so much, I wouldn't have allowed myself to have a single trace of my past. I would have been clean like Tang Yu. He hugged Pei Chi, and Pei Chi could feel his pain. Chapter 1143. Pei Chi couldn't remain indifferent. She slowly stretched out her hand and gently pressed on his shoulder. Anlin. He smiled bitterly. He rested his face on her shoulder and didn't say a word. The script fell on the floor and no one cared about it anymore. Yi Liangqiu stood far away and watched Qin Anlin embrace Pei Chi. She stood there quietly and didn't make a sound. She stood there until her body was cold. She smiled softly and suddenly looked up. There was a hint of warmth in her eyes. She hadn't cried for so many years. She had endured all the pain, but at this moment she wanted to cry. Because she couldn't see any hope. Yi Liangqiu didn't cry. Instead, she smiled and slowly turned around to walk back to the guest room. She closed the door and felt the pain in her heart. Pei Chi looked at the closed door and said softly, Anlin, are you really not going to consider it? She really loves you. She lowered her head to look at Qin Anlin, her fingers gently caressing his short hair. Her voice was pleasant to the ears. Perhaps you feel that Yi Liangqiu is scheming against you, but Anlin, isn't it more precious for a person to want another person so much, to exhaust all of his efforts to obtain her? Qin Anlin was stunned for a while and didn't reply to Pei Chi. He didn't tell her that if Pei Chi didn't exist in this world, he probably wouldn't be so cold-hearted towards Yi Liangqiu and wouldn't be so determined not to love her. He wouldn't tell her this because he couldn't bear to see her troubled. In the past, he only felt that he liked her and wanted her. But now, he suddenly wanted her to be happy. Chi, let's go back for dinner when you're free. He stroked her hair, just like in the past. His gaze was deep and the pain in his eyes made her unable to reject him. She said softly, okay. Qin Anlin smiled lightly and let go of her. He took a step back and pressed the elevator button. I'll send you down. He didn't force her at all. He didn't even ask her to leave Tang Yu. Retreating in order to advance was something he could do as well. When Pei Chi left the headquarters of King Entertainment, she let out a long sigh of relief. Because there was no more script, Qin Anlin did not allow her to publish it. No matter what, she had to talk to Yi Liangqiu. When she dialed Yi Liangqiu's number, Yi Liangqiu was very calm and just said that she got it. Later, Pei Chi sent the check to her. After doing all this, her heart was heavy. She had no intention to hurt Anlin, but it was true that she had stepped between Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu. Jiaran magazine. Pei Chi scratched her head in frustration. Amy moved her chair over and said softly, "What's wrong? Did old Can scold you because you messed up Empress Ye's matter?" Pei Chi glanced at Amy. "No." Amy sighed softly. "Actually, Qin Anlin is such an idiot. Think about it, with Empress Ye's current status, what man can't she find? Why does she have to rely on him? She raised her son for 7 years. Only an idiot would wait for 7 years like a fool." Pei Chi hung her head. The person involved can't see the situation clearly. Amy's expression suddenly became a little unnatural. "Chi, don't think too much. If you want to be with Mr. Tang wholeheartedly, you can't be fickle. These few years, Tang Yu has been living like a monk." She paused. "You can't be with Qin Anlin just because you sympathize with him." Pei Chi laughed and rested her chin on her hand. "I won't." Chapter 1144. She liked the cool Amy. She looked at Amy and said, "My dream is to take a stunning set of photos." Amy looked at her and thought that she was silly. Stunning photos. In the past, when Pei Chi and old Can took photos of rich ladies, it was quite stunning. However, Pei Chi had forgotten all about it. She was living like the naive Tang Xan and the 20-year-old Pei Chi who had not had the chance to enjoy life. Of course, old Can still reprimanded her afterward. This was what Lao Can said. "How could you lose the manuscript? If it is published, it will be a civil war within King Entertainment. If we do a serialization, the sales will go through the roof." Old Can said it shamelessly. Pei Chi looked at him and felt that his words sounded familiar, as if someone had said the same thing to her in the past. Old Can held a cigarette and puffed out smoke. 50 million, 50 million. Pei Chi, how many advertisements does our Jiaran magazine have to sell? How much alcohol do I have to drink to get 50 million? How could it be lost? And if it was done, Tang Yu would be happy. Once he was happy, he would allocate a huge sum of money to their magazine. They would become the industry leaders soon. It had to be said that old Can worked hard for the money for the milk powder. He had no choice. He had to support his wife and children. He couldn't earn money from the rich ladies outside, so he could only sell his moral integrity. Pei Chi pouted. "Why don't you go to King Entertainment's trash and look again?" Old Can waved his hand. "Forget it." He paused. "There will be an environmental photography exhibition next month. It's quite famous in the industry. I'll sign you up. You'll have to submit 4 works. That should be fine, right?" Pei Chi couldn't accept old Can's change of heart. He had been so unscrupulous just a moment ago, but now he was upright again. Old Can knew what she was thinking. He pressed the cigarette butt into the ashtray and smiled. "Chi, we live to live better. Of course, there are many people who are not living as well as we are. Doing charity isn't just talk. How can you do charity without money? Do you use your mouth to talk? Even if you paint a big cake, other people won't be full, right?" Pei Chi looked at him. Old Can took out a stack of receipts from his drawer and looked at Pei Chi. "These are the receipts that I've sponsored for the past 20 years. It's been so many years, and it's like a part of my life. If I don't do it, my whole body will feel uncomfortable and my heart will feel stifled." "Does Pei Huan know about it?" Pei Chi asked him. Old Can smiled. "I know. In the beginning, she found out that I always sent money to a few fixed accounts. She thought that I was supporting other people and argued with me for a while. Later, I took her to the mountains to see those children. She went to see it with me, and as she watched, she started crying. She hit me and asked why I didn't tell her earlier. Pei Huan had some savings. A selfish person like her actually took out 100 million in one go. That 100 million yuan was used to build a mountain road for the children in the countryside. Those children no longer had to walk the dangerous heaven stairs to school every day. Of course, that 100 million yuan made old Ken kneel and lick his wife for a month. In the past, he only thought that Pei Huan was cute and suitable for him. But after that time, he felt that he loved her very much. She was already a part of his life. As old Ken spoke, Pei Chi listened carefully. After a long time, she said softly, "Old Ken, you're very blessed." Chapter 11:45. Chi, you used to go there with me. Old Ken sounded nostalgic. We took pictures together and sold them for a lot of money to buy toys and school bags for the children. At that time, Chi was unhappy. He took her to the mountains and she slowly integrated into it. To old Ken, Pei Chi also needed his help. Just like those children. Pei Chi's voice was light. Is that why you wanted to make money so much? It's not that great. It's also for Pei Huan and the children. Old Ken stood up and patted Pei Chi on the shoulder. Chi, I think you have the potential to do charity work. Because she had two rich backers behind her. Pei Chi was not stupid, but she was willing to do something for those children. She looked at Old Kansas. Let's go there when we're free. Old Ken, let's change the film festival to an auction. Old Ken smiled and said, it's not a problem with the organizers. I'll arrange it. Pei Chi nodded and went out. Old Ken looked at Pei Chi with mixed feelings. Pei Huan was the one who came up with this trick. Pei Huan had said that Qin Anlin and Pei Chi would definitely get a divorce, but before that, they had to get some benefits. He had occupied someone else's wife for 2 years. Shouldn't he give her some rent? Old Ken thought it made sense. While Qin Anlin and Tang Yu were at each other's throats, it was convenient to get some benefits. That night, he really felt that his wife was very wise and far-sighted. As Pei Chi walked out, Amy mouthed, "Were you criticized?" Pei Chi shook her head. Amy covered her face in horror. Then Pei Chi, "You're finished. If you didn't get criticized, then Old Ken must have mentioned charity work to you, right?" Pei Chi was dumbfounded. Amy was very sympathetic. Old Ken is no longer the Old Ken he used to be. He has been led astray by his wife. The way Old Ken spoke now was the same as the former chief editor, full of tricks. Pei Chi, this naive and sweet girl, would definitely be fooled once she was fooled. Just like the few of them in the past, there was a time when they were tricked into leaving only enough money for their meals and used the rest for charity. Pei Chi smiled. I think he's quite cute, just like the former chief editor. She said it very smoothly, but then she was stunned. Amy looked at her expectantly, but didn't dare to rush her. Pei Chi knocked her head with her hand. She clearly remembered something just now, but after a while, she couldn't remember anything. Don't think about it, Chi. It doesn't matter if you want to come or not. Amy's voice was soft, afraid that she would scare her. All of them were especially afraid that something would happen to Pei Chi, so it didn't matter if she couldn't remember for the rest of her life. Pei Chi calmed down and her mind was blank. After a pause, she said softly, I seem to have remembered something just now, but now I've forgotten it. Amy hugged her as if she was a pitiful little girl. Actually, Chi was no different from before. She was just a little childish. Tang Yu didn't mind, and neither did they. Pei Chi smiled. Amy, you look so nervous. Chapter 11:46. That was the closest thing to the truth. Pei Chi held her breath and looked at Amy. Chi, don't think about it. I'll feel guilty if you have a headache. They had all been warned by Lao Ka not to talk about the past with Chi-Chi. She had been impulsive just now, and now that she thought about it, she felt a little regretful. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and said after a long time, "Amy, I'll definitely remember it." Amy smiled with tears in her eyes. Pei Chi-Chi smiled too. Although she couldn't remember it, she felt very happy. She had friends, loved ones, and a little heart. She felt that her past was so full that it filled up the blanks in the present. So what if she couldn't remember it? These people wouldn't disappear. They still loved her and had been waiting for her for so long. That night, she lay on the balcony of her apartment in Xia City and looked at the moon outside. The moonlight was clear and calm like water, sprinkling on her body. Her heart was also calm. She had made up her mind. Perhaps she had been wrong all along. She had been waiting for Anlin to give up, and she had thought that it wouldn't be too cruel to Anlin. However, she had been cruel to Tang Yu. He was waiting for her. But she hadn't replied, and she hadn't been determined to be with him. She suddenly understood why Tang Yu hadn't really wanted her. It was because of his pride, and because she was still Qin Anlin's wife. Pei Chi-Chi suddenly picked up her phone and called Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin picked up the phone. At that moment, he was in his penthouse apartment, looking at the moonlight like Pei Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi. He called her name hoarsely. He had a feeling that she was going to say something to him. Pei Chi-Chi's heart was beating a little fast, and her voice was a little dry. "Anlin, I'm sorry." There was a long pause on the other end before he said, "Okay." He didn't ask her why, didn't ask her what had happened. He only said one word. Pei Chi-Chi was very sad. She was so sad that she cried. She kept apologizing to him. Her words made his heart ache. Qin Anlin's voice was gentler than the night, but it was extremely hoarse. He said, "Chi-Chi, silly girl. What did she have to let him down? He was the one who possessed her for 2 years. He was the one who deceived her. Finally, his little girl was going to say goodbye to him, and he had no reason to keep her." Qin Anlin raised his head. He had never thought that he would give up so easily, and just let her be. "Chi-Chi, sing me another song." Qin Anlin smiled. He poured himself a glass of red wine and shook it gently. Her songs were terrible. He had said it more than once, but after that, he could no longer hear it. She was singing Two Tigers. Qin Anlin said in a low voice, "Chi-Chi, it's terrible." He didn't ask her to stop, so his little girl kept singing. In the end, she said she was sorry. She kept talking until her voice was hoarse. Qin Anlin had thought that if she said that she didn't want a divorce, he would go to her side without hesitation and take her away without thinking about whether she would regret it. However, his little girl finally hardened her heart, and he finally lost her completely. That night, she cried, and he was drunk, his stomach felt like it was on fire. He didn't even remember how much he drank. He only knew that he kept drinking. At dawn, Qin Anlin called 120. Chapter 1147. Keim called Pei Chi-Chi. "Miss Pei, President Qin's stomach has perforated and he's been admitted to the hospital. He's refusing surgery now." Keim sounded anxious. "Can you come over?" Pei Chi-Chi asked the hospital and immediately turned the car around to head to City General Hospital. She rushed to the emergency room where the doctor was waiting for her. When he saw her, his voice was stern. "The patient is already in such a state and he's still refusing surgery. Are you his family member?" Pei Chi-Chi did not hesitate. "Yes." "Where do I sign?" She signed her name without even looking at the form. The doctor closed the form. "Go take a look." If you have anything to say, tell us. We're very humane. Pei Chi-Chi's face was pale and her footsteps were unsteady. At this moment, she felt extremely guilty and upset. Anlan's stomach had perforated because he had been drinking. It was her fault. Kaim supported her and said in her ear, "Miss Pei, you can't collapse now. President Qin still needs you." Pei Chi-Chi nodded and ran into the emergency room. She walked quickly to the operating table. She half knelt in front of Qin Anlan and said anxiously, "Anlan, how are you feeling?" Her fingers held Qin Anlan's hand. His hand was burning. Qin Anlan opened his eyes. His gaze was weak but his lips were curled into a faint smile. He looked at her and smiled gently. "Chi-Chi, why are you crying?" He wanted to raise his fingers to hold her. He wanted to touch her again and wipe away her tears. However, he could not even lift his hand. Qin Anlan closed his eyes. He didn't have the strength to look at her again. "All right, the patient will be undergoing surgery soon." The doctor was already preparing. He was expressionless. "The family member is waiting outside and will be out in about 2 hours." Pei Chi-Chi was supported by Kaim outside. Her gaze was fixed on the door of the operating room. Kaim's voice was very soft. "Miss Pei, President Qin really loves you. I've never seen him like this before." Pei Chi-Chi raised her head and let out a long sigh. She wanted to split herself in two but that was impossible and unrealistic. She stood outside, waiting for Qin Anlan to come out, waiting for him to be well. Kami, on the other hand, went to buy some necessities. He felt a little guilty. His role in this whole incident wasn't honorable, and Boss Qin seemed to have noticed it. After buying the necessities, he went to settle various matters and accompanied Pei Chi-Chi. Fortunately, the surgery was performed in time, and Qin Anlan was fine. He was soon pushed out of the operating theater and into the VIP ward. The surgery wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. The nurse changed the intravenous drip and said to Pei Chi-Chi gently, "The patient can't eat or drink for the next few days. The doctor will tell you when he can eat. The doctor will tell you when he can eat." Pei Chi-Chi nodded. She looked at Qin Anlan and slowly sat beside him. He had a high fever, so she kept taking care of him and cooling him down. She was so meticulous that Kaim felt that they were truly in love. Qin Anlan was unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. During these 2 days and 2 nights, Pei Chi-Chi was in the hospital. She didn't call Tang Yu, because she forgot. The night Tang Yu returned to B City from a city, Xia City was pitch black. In fact, he already knew that Qin Anlan was hospitalized and that Pei Chi-Chi was in the hospital. She didn't tell him and he didn't call her to ask. He wasn't an unreasonable person but he still cared. Did Chi-Chi really not love Qin Anlan when she lost her memory? If she didn't love him, how could she forget to call him? How could she forget that he was returning to B City today? Chapter 1148. He stood on the balcony of his apartment in Xia City and smoked for the whole night. That night, his phone didn't ring. 1 day, 2 days, he saw the news of Qin Anlan being hospitalized in the newspaper and the media writing about the scandal between Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan. Tang Yu could only smile bitterly. He looked at the night sky and took out his phone. After staring at it for a long time, there were no words on it. He took the glass of red wine to the side and typed 1 word at a time. "Don't be too tired." After writing these 5 words, Tang Yu realized how petty he was. Yes, he was jealous and unhappy. At least, he didn't completely own her heart. He didn't know about the 2 years she and Anlan spent together, and he didn't dare to know about it. His heart ached faintly, but he was willing to accept it. Putting his phone aside, Tang Yu took a shower and came out wearing only a bathrobe. He picked up his phone with mixed feelings. He hoped to see her reply, but strangely, he didn't. She didn't reply. There were no words on the phone, only a few messages from Xiao Ran. Tang Yu pursed his lips. Then he looked at the night sky outside, thinking about her and angry at her. He also felt that he was ridiculous. She was so young. Why should he be angry with her? Even if she liked Anlin. Wasn't it normal? They lived together for 2 years, and she forgot everything. Anlin loved her so much. He was scared just thinking about it. In such a long time, when she was treated gently by Anlin, she didn't fall in love with Anlin, but, was there a big difference? At the hospital, Pei Chi only saw the message 2 hours later. She looked at the few words for a long time, then looked up at Anlin who was lying on the bed. After a long time, there was a reply. Yeah. Then, she thought for a moment and added another message. Are you back? Tang Yu wasn't asleep. When he heard his phone ring, he picked it up and looked at it. Only Pei Chi could make him feel uneasy. Pursing his lips, he looked at the message she left for him. Feeling vexed, he didn't reply. Pei Chi waited for a long time but did not see him. She thought that he might have fallen asleep. 2 days later, Qin Anlin woke up. Tang Yu didn't send any more messages or calls. Vaguely, Pei Chi had a feeling that he was angry. She didn't know how to explain, and she couldn't explain, but she couldn't ignore Anlin. After Qin Anlin woke up, the doctor said he could eat some liquid food. She cooked porridge for him and fed him little by little. Qin Anlin leaned against the headboard and looked at her submissive face. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi, how many days have you been here? She nodded and fed him again, but he didn't eat it. Instead, he grabbed her slender wrist. Anlin. She raised her eyes and looked at him. Qin Anlin saw that there were dark circles under her eyes. She must have stayed up late. He smiled bitterly. Chi, if I didn't know that you loved him deeply, I would have thought that you had feelings for me too. He almost couldn't bear to give up. Pei Chi said after a long time, Anlin, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize to me, Chi. You didn't do anything wrong to me. I was delusional. He held her hand slowly. I've signed the divorce papers and left them in the apartment. I'll get Kaim to sign them later. Chapter 1149. Qin Anlin smiled bitterly. You're right. I should give Muyun a father. Pei Chi hugged him. Qin Anlin was in pain, but he held it in. After a while, he chuckled. Chi, be happy in the future. He rested his chin on the top of her head. His eyes were warm, and his voice was hoarse. It's okay if you can't remember. He loves you very much. Pei Chi cried in his arms. Qin Anlin smiled bitterly. Chi, why do I feel like I'm marrying off my daughter? He liked her very much, and he didn't want to let go of her, but he gave her what she wanted just like that. Alright, let's go back. Kaim is here. He stroked her hair, his voice deep. Pei Chi shook her head in his arms and hugged him again. Qin Anlin felt terrible, but he only smiled and said, let's go back. She shook her head furiously and cried like a child. Qin Anlin called Kaim and asked him to send Pei Chi back. Pei Chi was a little dizzy, and she didn't realize that the car had arrived at Xiao City. Kaim stopped the car and said calmly, Miss Pei, go on up. President Qin said that he wants me to watch you go up. Pei Chi was stunned for a moment before she said, take good care of him. Okay, I will. Kaim sighed. President Qin has really let go. In the future, he said, sometimes being cruel is the greatest kindness to him. He knew that Pei Chi had feelings for Qin Anlin. After all, they had lived together for 2 years. It was really hard for her to not care about him. However, if she were to interfere in President Qin's life now, it would be hard for President Qin to get over it. How could Pei Chi not know that? She looked down. Call me if you need anything. Kim sighed inwardly. If it weren't for Tang Yu, Pei Chi would probably have fallen in love with President Qin. She definitely would have. Pei Chi got out of the car and walked into the elevator. Relieved, Kim drove the car away. Walking out of the elevator, Pei Chi's legs were soft. She clearly knew in her heart that she and Anlin could not be like before. She was selfish. On one hand, she wanted Tang Yu's love. On the other hand, she didn't want to give up Anlin's warmth. She didn't want to give up the memories they once had. However, these two things couldn't coexist, because Anlin would suffer. When he got home, he closed the door but didn't turn on the lights. Instead, he leaned against the door. The light suddenly came on. Her eyes were a little sore because she had stayed up for 2 nights and also because she had cried. Under the bright lights, she saw Tang Yu sitting on the sofa, looking at her quietly. "You're at home." She walked over slowly and sat beside him. Tang Yu replied. He carried her onto his lap and kissed her forehead. "Go take a shower. You smell like medicine." Pei Chi sniffed herself and stuck out her tongue. "I'm done." She was pretending to be relaxed. How could he not see it? He felt a little pain in his heart, but he only smiled. Pei Chi walked into the bathroom and sniffed herself again. She turned on the warm water and felt a little uneasy. She had a feeling that there was something hidden under Tang Yu's calm exterior. Actually, he should be angry. She raised her head and let the warm water wash over her body. Feeling a little tired, she slowly leaned against the wall. The bathroom door was pulled open. She looked up and saw Tang Yu standing at the door. Chapter 1150. Pei Chi covered her body and pursed her lips, looking a little uneasy. "Tang Yu. Let's bathe together." He removed his clothes calmly, as if they were a normal couple sharing a bathroom. When he walked over like that, her heart trembled with every step he took. She had never seen him like that, at least not in her memory. Tang Yu stood up and rushed forward. Then, seeing that she was standing there, he grabbed her and brought her over. He cleaned her up as if he was washing a kitten or a puppy. Pei Chi's head and face were full of bubbles. She felt uncomfortable, but she did not dare to make a sound. At that moment, she was a little afraid of him not wearing any clothes. Finally, he finished washing her and carried her back to the bedroom with a towel. He let her sit in his arms and helped her dry her hair. His actions were very slow, but Pei Chi felt that it was the prelude to execution. When her hair was dry, she was pushed down. Her long black hair was scattered all over the pillow. Her face was a little pale, and her eyes were wide open. She looked very lovely. She was a little nervous. Her little hand grabbed the front of his bathrobe. "Tang Yu." He leaned forward and sniffed her hair. His voice was hoarse. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Her voice was trembling. She looked at him helplessly and her little hand tightened. Tang Yu bent down and rubbed the tip of his nose against hers. The cool touch made her feel a little more comfortable, but she was even more afraid. He had not done anything yet, but she felt a tearing force. Pei Chi bit her lip. Her little mouth was red, and her eyes were almost watery. "Don't be afraid. I'll be gentle." His voice was low. After that, he did not hold back anymore. He kissed her little mouth and wantonly kissed her. She whimpered and struggled. Her hands were pinned to her sides. Tang Yu stopped kissing her and looked down at her from above, his eyes burning. Pei Chi felt like he was going to eat her up. Her body trembled, and her petite mouth was slightly open. It was slightly swollen. He freed a hand and caressed her little mouth gently. Chi, I can't wait any longer. His voice was deep and gentle. As he spoke, he placed her hands on his waist and lowered his body to kiss her. Pei Chi was in so much pain that she wanted to hit him with her fists. He was a bastard. He had said that it wouldn't hurt and that he would be gentle. But, it was so painful. Her long eyelashes blinked tears, and her small face was full of hopelessness. He lied to her. This kind of thing was not comfortable at all, only painful. Her body struggled with all her might, crying loudly, but she couldn't escape. How could a man who had been forbidden for 2 years endure it? Even though she was crying and struggling, he still pressed her down and did it without a care. Pei Chi cried until she couldn't move anymore. She was exhausted, so she closed her eyes and let him do whatever he wanted. In her half-conscious state, she heard his moaning and hugged him tightly. This kind of thing was so painful, but why did he look so comfortable? This hug completely messed up his rhythm. He wasn't that rough at first, but when she hugged him like this, he was so aroused that he didn't care about anything else. Pei Chi's voice was hoarse from crying, but he didn't let her go. It was until late at night when he was finally satisfied. She lay in his arms like a little animal that was on the verge of death. Her little hands hugged his neck, and she was still trembling. Tang Yu held her hand and looked at the blister on her hand. He asked softly, "How did your hand get hurt?" She was half awake and said in a low voice, "It's to make porridge for Anlin." Anlin. Chapter 1151. He had thought that he was the only one who knew how to cook, but it turned out that she knew how to make porridge for Qin Anlin too. Tang Yu got off the bed nimbly. Pei Chi's body was empty as she opened her eyes to search for him. After a while, he returned with a tube of ointment in his hand. He came over and gently applied it for her. Pei Chi looked up at him and bit her lips. "Are you angry?" It was only then that they could talk properly. It was already 4:00 at night. "Why would I be angry?" He applied the ointment for her and stroked her hair. "All right, time to sleep." He lay flat on his back with Pei Chi beside him. He did not hug her for a long time, and she felt uneasy. She hugged his arm and said softly, "I couldn't ignore him at that time." Tang Yu sighed and said softly in the dark, "Chi, I've never been angry about this." He wasn't afraid. He was just a little afraid. Did she, like Anlin? So, he had lost control tonight. It was clearly not the best time, and she was clearly very tired, but he still wanted her. It was almost violent. "Oh," Pei Chi replied. She muttered in her heart. He was clearly angry. Later, she hugged his arm but could not fall asleep. An hour later, Tang Yu asked in a hoarse voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" She was still very sleepy when they did it earlier and slept the entire time. Honestly, he wasn't that happy either. She didn't seem to feel anything. As a man, it was quite depressing. Pei Chi's little face was pressed against his arm. After a while, she said softly, "Tang Yu, it hurts a little." He hugged her shoulders and turned on the bedside lamp. He sat up immediately and looked at her eyes. "Where does it hurt?" Pei Chi lowered her head shyly and did not say anything. Tang Yu understood immediately. His expression was a little profound as he reached out and turned on all the lights. She realized that he was probably trying to do something. She hugged the bedsheet in her arms and refused to let him check. Tang Yu coaxed her, "All right, be good. Let me see." She refused and kicked him. She was a little stubborn, but in the end, she was the one who was in pain. Tang Yu also let her do whatever she wanted. He knew that he had gone too far tonight. He reached out and held her in his arms. After coaxing her for a while, he half knelt down and examined her carefully under the light. Pei Chi turned her face to the side shyly. Tang Yu's eyes seemed to be on fire. Looking at her like this, she was naturally a little emotional, but she forcefully suppressed it because she was a little hurt. "I'll get a hot towel to help you apply a hot compress." He kissed her forehead. When he got out of bed, she tugged at his bathrobe. He turned back and said, "I'll be back soon." Pei Chi watched him walk into the bathroom. When he came back, he had a towel in his hand. He helped her warm up, and she felt better. She let out a sigh. Tang Yu raised his head. After a long time, he asked softly, "Chi, did I make you feel uncomfortable doing that?" Actually, he wanted to ask in more detail, but he did not. Pei Chi pouted her lips and snuggled in his embrace. After a while, she said softly, "It hurts." "Only pain." Tang Yu thought about it silently. Was it because he had not done it for 2 years that his skills were rusty? Pei Chi bit her lips and leaned in his embrace. She asked in a soft voice, "Are you feeling very comfortable?" His Adam's apple bobbed for a while before he replied, "Yes." Chapter 1152. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi, speechless. How could a man be described as a soul? However, he still felt a little helpless as he looked at her because he had made his little girl feel pain. Lying side by side, he said in a low voice, "It won't hurt anymore. But it still hurts after you did it a few times." Pei Chi turned over and lay in his arms, looking especially rascally. "I won't do it again." Tang Yu looked down at the little person in his arms. His heart was filled with tenderness and helplessness. However, at times like this, he was still willing to coax her. "All right, I won't do it again." Pei Chi looked up at him for a while before lowering her head again. "You're lying." He seemed to be enjoying it so much. How could he be willing to give it up? Tang Yu chuckled. "Yes, I'm lying." As she said that, she felt a heart-rending resistance. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Didn't they say that men had to rest for half an hour? And he had just done it a few times. Her little hands hugged him tightly, fearing that he would do something stupid again. Tang Yu could feel the little thing's fear in his arms. He rubbed her little head and said in a low voice, "You're in so much pain. How could I do it again?" She buried herself in his arms and said after a long time, "I cried before, but you didn't stop either." His heart softened as he listened. His fingers caressed the place where she had endured him, and he asked gently, "Does it still hurt?" "It hurts," she said coyly as she wrapped her little hands around his neck. Tang Yu smiled and comforted her gently. As he rubbed her, not only him, but her breathing was also slightly erratic, and her little body kept burrowing into his arms. She didn't feel much at the start, only pain. But as he continued to rub it, she couldn't take it anymore. She pursed her lips and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't move." She couldn't stop her voice. Tang Yu naturally felt the change in her. He chuckled and whispered into her ear, "Chi, if you want, I'll feed you a little more." "I don't want to." She closed her eyes tightly and hit his shoulder with her little hand. "Go to sleep." He was only teasing her because her body couldn't take another round. The two of them lay together and had many things to say to each other. Pei Chi-Chi's face was resting on his waist and her voice was like a little lamb. "Tang Yu, Anlin has agreed to the divorce." He propped himself up and looked down at her. Pei Chi-Chi also raised her head and looked at each other in the misty gaze. After a long while, Tang Yu said in a low voice, "Chi-Chi, are you very sad?" Yes. She threw herself into his arms. Tang Yu, I don't know what happened in the past, but he has been by my side for the past 2 years. He treats me very well. I think if it wasn't for Anlin, I might not be able to appear in front of you in such a good condition today. He sighed in his heart. How could he not know all of this? So, he did not stop Qin Anlin from seeing her. If that was the case, he would have lost. Tang Yu hugged her as though he was carrying a little daughter. She buried herself in his arms and cried for another man. And he could only accompany her. His heart was heavy, but he knew that she was finally back. Chi-Chi, come back. You will slowly forget about those 2 years in the future. Chapter 1153. As the days passed, Pei Chi-Chi visited Qin Anlin twice more. She didn't say anything and just sat by the bed to take care of him, peeling fruits for him. Qin Anlin was able to get up and walk around, but he still rested in bed most of the time. He quietly watched as Pei Chi-Chi peeled fruits and suddenly said, I've asked Haim to bring the agreement over. You can sign it after you see that there are no problems. Pei Chi-Chi's gaze fell on his face and then moved to the brown paper bag at the head of the bed. After a long time, she said softly, Anlin, sign it. He smiled and looked at her. Pei Chi-Chi, I'm not doing this to help you. I'm doing this for myself. She didn't understand. He continued and smiled. I'm going to marry Yi Liangqiu. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't believe it. He had decided to get married so soon. So sign it. Qin Anlin looked out of the window. Pei Chi-Chi, you don't have to feel guilty because you never liked me before. I probably couldn't accept it, so I told you that I was your husband after you lost your memory. His gaze slowly fell on her face and he smiled bitterly. It was my wishful thinking from the beginning to the end. Now, Pei Chi-Chi, you're free. There was a touch of sadness in Qin Anlin's eyes. I should be the one apologizing. I wasted 2 years of your life and I selfishly wanted to keep you. Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything and kept looking at him. After a long time, she got up gently and went forward to hug him. Anlin, there's no relationship that you're sorry for. Let's not talk about it like this in the future, okay? He closed his eyes and there was a touch of pain in them. Chi-Chi, this was the last hug. Let me hug you for the last time. The girl who acted like a spoiled child, who asked him for pocket money, who asked him to build a snowman in the New York winter, would never appear in front of him again. Qin Anlin's eyes were warm and his voice was hoarse. Sign it, or I'll regret it. When Pei Chi-Chi was signing, her fingers were trembling. Anlin, if this was a mistake, then it was a beautiful one. Anlin, thank you. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Anlin, I wish you happiness. He nodded. I will. I'll be getting married in Las Vegas, so I won't invite you. Pei Chi-Chi understood that with Yi Liangqiu's status, she wouldn't reveal her marriage. She didn't ask Qin Anlin why he suddenly wanted to marry Yi Liangqiu. Just like what Haim said, it was best not to ask. She and Qin Anlin officially divorced. When she got the green book, she felt like she had had a dream. After returning home, she lay in bed and had a dream about New York. In the dream, there was no Anlin, but Tang Yu. When she woke up, she was sweating all over and felt like a small animal was licking her body. When she opened her eyes, she saw Tang Yu's head. The light in the bedroom was dim. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and reached out to pull his black hair. You're back. He had been on a business trip a lot these days, always for 1 or 2 days. She could only see him 2 or 3 times a week. Tang Yu nodded and buried his face in her neck. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi-Chi, your marriage with Qin Anlin is cancelled. Chapter 1154. She nudged him. Hurry up and go take a shower. He sniffed her neck with the tip of his nose and smiled. Chi-Chi, your body smells like sweat. Let's shower together. With that said, before she could reject him, he carried her and walked straight to the bathroom. As he walked, he coaxed her to unbutton his shirt. Chi-Chi blushed. Glancing at him, she hooked her arms around his neck and unbuttoned his shirt with one hand. Her movements were clumsy and she couldn't undo it for a long time. In the end, she angrily pulled it off. Little one, what's the hurry? He chided her. Chi-Chi's eyes were watery. Her hands hung softly around his neck and her face was pressed against his neck. It was soft and indescribably alluring. Tang Yu's heart was about to melt. This little one. He held her with one hand and filled the bathtub with warm water with the other. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her, murmuring, let's take a bath together, Chi-Chi raised her head and accepted his kiss. Then, their clothes fell apart. She only woke up when they were soaking in the water together. She opened her eyes and her body was bobbing up and down. She hurriedly clung onto him. Tang Yu lay on his back a little absent-mindedly and patted her back. Chi-Chi, when are we going to get married again? She was a little stunned. Then, she lay in his arms and murmured, how many times have I been married? He couldn't help but laugh. He kissed her little face. Chi-Chi, you know it yourself. Who asked you to lose me? She grumbled. Then, she crawled over and hugged his neck, kissing him. The kiss made Tang Yu's blood boil. He couldn't bear to be cruel to her before, but now, this little one was offering herself to be kissed by him. Tang Yu pressed down on her little head and kissed her deeply, allowing the kiss to ignite the fire in his body. In the end, they went to the bedroom to complete their second round of lovemaking. Unlike the last time, it was obvious that she was more into it this time. Occasionally, when he was heavy, she would gently bite her lips and meow like a kitten. Tang Yu did not dare to be too rough. This time, she followed her feelings and superimposed them over and over again. Finally, she was thrown high into the sky and slowly landed. She was a little scared in his arms. Her trembling made Tang Yu's heart ache, as if he had bullied her. He coaxed her for a long time before she fell asleep. Tang Yu didn't sleep. He looked at the book for a long time before putting it away. Chi-Chi fell asleep. He sat alone on the balcony for a long time, smoking a cigarette and looking at the night sky outside. His cell phone rang twice. He walked over to take a look. It was a call from Qin Anlin. Tang Yu picked it up and said calmly, Anlin. Tang Yu, treat her well. Qin Anlin's voice was even lonelier than the night sky. He only said 6 simple words. Tang Yu held the empty wine glass in his hand and smiled. I will. Between men, there was usually no need to say too much to understand each other's intentions. Liang Yu hung up and turned to look at Chi-Chi. She was hugging the blanket and sleeping soundly. She kicked the blanket away, probably because she was afraid of the heat. She only had a bathrobe on, and now that it was all spread out, it was extremely alluring. Tang Yu put down the glass in his hand, got up and walked over to her. He bent down and kissed her. His voice was low and deep. Chi-Chi. Chapter 1155. It was gentle and charming the whole night. Chi-Chi didn't wake up until noon. She opened her eyes and looked around. This was the rose garden, where she had stayed for one night. You're awake. Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her little mouth. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi-Chi looked up at him helplessly. After a long time, she asked softly, how did I get here? Tang Yu sat next to her and said in a low voice, Early in the morning, my family called and said that Xiaoxin had diarrhea, so I came back. Pei Qiqi sat up and asked, "How is she now?" Tang Yu reached out and gently pinched her little face. "You're not angry with her anymore?" "I'm talking business with you." Pei Qiqi pulled down his hand and said coquettishly. Tang Yu smiled. "I've been to the hospital and I'm much better after taking medicine." Pei Qiqi lifted the quilt. "I'll go and have a look." Tang Yu stopped her. "Wait a minute." Pei Qiqi looked at him in confusion. He smiled. "Qiqi, change your clothes before you go." She ran to the bathroom suspiciously and came back after a while. She put her little face in his neck and bit hard to vent her anger. Tang Yu let her do whatever she wanted and just reminded her, "My mother and Uncle Zhao will come for lunch at noon." "Qiqi, are you sure you want to keep this?" Pei Qiqi stared at him. Tang Yu hugged her. "Didn't you say you're going to see Xiaoxin? Change your clothes, be good." He stroked her hair, as if he was treating his little daughter. He was simply spoiling her rotten. Pei Qiqi pouted. "I really don't know how I used to like you." He buttoned up her clothes for her and said in all seriousness, "Actually, Qiqi, I was the one who liked you first." Her eyes were very bright. If she didn't care about Xiaoxin, she would have pestered him to tell her about the past. She ran to Xiaoxin's bedroom. The baby was lying on the bed, happily stealing food. Tang Yu followed behind Pei Qiqi and saw that she was trying to hide the milk emperor bag by the door. He coughed lightly and said, "The doctor said that I can't eat for 12 hours. She carefully handed over the little milk king bun, and before Tang Yu came over, she took a small bite. Pei Qiqi finally understood why Xiaoxin was so fat. She and Tang Yu were obviously not fat. Tang Yu was both annoyed and amused by Xian's behavior. He reached out and patted her chubby little palm. "Don't do this again." His little heart was hit. He howled and then obediently lay in Pei Qiqi's arms. Pei Qiqi's heart was about to melt when she saw such a fragrant and soft little fellow lying obediently in her arms. Just as she was about to speak, Xiaoxin made a goo-goo sound. Pei Qiqi looked at Tang Yu and Tang Yu looked at Xiaoxin. The fat little fellow was dejected. "I'm going to poop." She had just eaten, but she went in and pooped again. Xiaoxin's little face was red and she made a lot of noises. Pei Qiqi felt sorry for her, so she accompanied her, although it was very smelly. She probably gave birth to it. Later, she washed Xiaoxin and put her on the bed. Tang Yu brought a cup of water over and served the little princess. Being surrounded by so many people, little Xian became a little arrogant. She was especially arrogant. Tang Yu was about to scold her. In fact, he wanted to scare her, but Pei Qiqi didn't allow it. She hugged him and said shamelessly, "Don't scold her." Chapter 1156. She burrowed into his arms. She was not a loving mother. She was also his little darling. Tang Yu looked at her and found it both funny and annoying. It was just like what his mother had said. There were 2 children in the family, but she was fine like this. Pei Qiqi howled and blinked at Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin smiled happily. Mama was not angry anymore. At noon, Lin Yun and Zhao Yi brought little Zhao Yan over. Little Zhao Yan was born 2 months later than Xiaoxin, but he looked much more mature. He was a standard little gentleman, very much like Zhao Yi. Although Pei Qiqi did not remember, her marriage with Qin Anlin had already been dissolved. How could she be with Tang Yu without any status? Moreover, they were husband and wife before, so they still had to get a certificate. As for the wedding, Tang Yu rejected it without thinking. He had a shadow over the wedding. After Lin Yun and the others left, Pei Xiaoqi made a fuss and hung on Tang Yu like a little monkey. "You don't want to have a wedding. You must think that I'm married for the second time, right? Tang Yu sat in the study reading documents and looked at Pei Chi with slight disdain. He coughed lightly. Pei Chi, you're not married for the second time. You're married for the third and fourth time. Her eyes widened. He kissed her seductive little mouth and chuckled. However, I'm still your only man. She was still petrified. He said that she was married for the third and fourth time. Tang Yu. She snorted. You're so annoying. He laughed silently. Just because of such childish words, even if she was married 100 times, she would still be the 20-year-old girl in his heart, appearing in his room so tenderly. Then what do you not hate? He pretended to be focused on work. His gaze fell on the work and his voice was indifferent. I'll try my best to do it. Pei Chi knelt in front of him and snatched the document from his hand. I want you to take back what you said just now. Tang Yu's gaze paused on her little face for a few seconds before he smiled. Chi, you're becoming more and more like a child. I quite like it. He pinched her little face. I've always been tolerant of you. She could sense that he was in a good mood. Presumably, it was because she and Qin Anlin had broken up. In the past, he didn't show off much, as if he didn't care much about it. But now, he really showed his true nature. Pei Chi pinched his face angrily. I want to wear a wedding dress. Mr. Tang nodded in agreement. Well, you can wear it for me alone. She stared at him blankly. Tang Yu got up and took her hand to the dressing room attached to the bedroom. He pressed a button and the wall of the dressing room moved to the side. In the huge space, a wedding dress decorated with Swarovski crystals hung in the middle, dazzling and dazzling. Pei Chi raised her head and opened her mouth slightly, feeling a little surprised. Do you want to try it on? He pressed her shoulder and smiled. Pei Chi's voice was like a little lamb. Tang Yu, is it really mine? Here, even I am yours. He hugged her from behind and whispered in her ear. It was hoarse and pleasant. Let me help you change. Before she could say no, her dress fell to the ground. He personally helped her put on the wedding dress. It was a British-style wedding dress made of tens of thousands of crystals. It was very heavy, but it was super dreamy. Chapter 1157. He pulled her hair up and secured it with a diamond hairpin. Looking at herself in the mirror, she looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Tang Yu squatted down to help her put on her crystal shoes. She was standing and he was half kneeling in front of her, looking a little humble. Holding her fair feet, Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed the hem of her dress. His voice was hoarse. Chi, this is our wedding. She was stunned. He got up and hugged her in his arms. She felt a warm sensation on her neck. Was that because he was crying? After a long time, she heard his voice. Chi, welcome home. Now, she was finally back. She was no longer someone else's wife, but Tang Yu's. Pei Chi looked up at his handsome face and smiled. Mr. Tang, can I have a dance with you? Even if she didn't remember, he loved her and she loved him. That was enough. Even if their memory started from that dance, it was still perfect. At least, she fell in love with him at first sight, or rather, his body at first sight. Tang Yu smiled. Of course. They danced in the bedroom for the whole day until she was exhausted. In the end, she was forced to sign the marriage contract. That night, she was pressed down by him for the whole night. Pei Chi shed tears and reflected on life. Actually, it was better to be single. At least it wasn't so tiring. Or it was better to be Anlin's wife. It wouldn't be so tiring and she wouldn't have to do physical labor. Pei Chi was especially honest now. She dared to say and do what she wanted. Hence, Tang Yu pressed down on her even more. She was exhausted and he was too shameless. She couldn't take it anymore and wanted to sleep. It was useless even if she begged him. In the wee hours of the morning, he was still in high spirits and lectured, "Baby, call Daddy and you'll sleep." She didn't want to call him that. He was so perverted. But if she didn't, Tang Yu pressed down on her and whipped her mercilessly. It was useless even if she begged for death. She could only cry out obediently with tears in her eyes. But he had lied to her. He had clearly said that he would let her go once he called out. In the end, he had been hot-blooded the entire night and hadn't let her go. But this time, she didn't feel any pain. Perhaps it was because she was no longer in pain and was starting to feel something again, so Tang Yu was exceptionally open. The man who had been repressed for 2 years had finally unleashed his beastly nature. In the end, it was messy and tiring. She had to go to work the next day. Pei Chi hurriedly got up and hammered Tang Yu's shoulder. "I want to go to work." He carried her to the bathroom and carried her like a baby to wash her face and brush her teeth. In the end, the two of them shared a tube of toothpaste. While the two of them were fooling around, Pei Chi suddenly said, "I want to go collecting next week." She said it in his arms. Tang Yu frowned and looked at her. Where to? They had just gotten together, he didn't want to separate from her. Besides, what was the point of collecting? He still wanted to fool around. Pei Chi stopped him and said in a low voice, "It's a charity photography exhibition." "Tang Yu, I want to go." He smiled helplessly. "You must have been duped by old Ken, right?" Pei Chi's eyes widened. Tang Yu smiled. "Old Ken has duped a lot of people in the past 2 years. But he's really a good person." He thought for a moment. "I can go, but I can't go alone." Chapter 1158. After that, Tang Yu carried Pei Chi to put on her clothes, as though he was taking care of little Xin. However, Pei Chi was still biting on his body. Because she couldn't look into his neck, how was she going to get out like that? Tang Yu smiled and kissed her. This is a normal thing between a husband and wife. His nose touched hers gently and he paused for a moment before saying meaningfully, "Chi, you're much better than before." Much better. Pei Chi looked at him with tears in her eyes. She glared at him for a while. "You're so naughty. Isn't that so?" He pressed her little face against his chest and whispered naughtily beside her ear, "Didn't you feel much better just now? You know you need to ask for more." She was a little shy and bit his neck. "Don't say any more." Tang Yu saw that she was really shy. He laughed and finally let her go, carrying her downstairs for breakfast. Downstairs, the maids lined up in a row and smiled. "Good morning, sir and madam." Tang Yu nodded his head nobly. Pei Chi punched his shoulder with her little fist. "Even if I marry you like this, isn't it too much of a loss?" Her eyes were lively and dazzling. He looked at her for a while before saying, "Chi, do you still want to wear the wedding gown?" She covered her face. She didn't want to hear it anymore. He was a pervert. That gorgeous and dreamy wedding dress had been torn in half by him with one hand. She didn't want to wear it anymore. She stared at him with watery eyes. Tang Yu's heart softened and he stroked her hair. "Eat your breakfast. I'll send you to work later." Pei Chi drank her milk. "Don't you have to work today?" Tang Yu laid out the napkin and looked at her. He said slowly, "I'm on marriage leave." Pei Chi was shocked. She stared at him deeply and weakly. Tang Yu chuckled. "Chi, you can apply for marriage leave too." "I don't want to. There's no wedding, and I've been married a few times already." She pouted, looking aggrieved. Mr. Tang happily agreed. That's true. How about this? I'll send you to work every day during the wedding break, okay? Pei Chi did not reply and continued eating her breakfast. Tang Yu suddenly said, Chi, I made breakfast. She looked at him and was a little surprised. She didn't expect him to wake up so early to make breakfast for her when there were so many servants in the house. Looking at her silly look, Tang Yu smiled and patted her head as if he was patting a lamb. Mrs. Tang, do you feel like a newlywed? She glanced at him and continued to eat her breakfast. However, her breakfast was sweet. Tang Yu looked at her satisfied little face, and his heart was also satisfied. She would be cute no matter what she turned into, although she was a little silly. In fact, his Chi was originally a silly girl. It was only because she had worked too hard in the past that she looked more mature than her peers. Now, he was willing to spoil her until she was 8 years old. It would be best if she couldn't take care of herself. This was a little perverted idea in Tang Yu's heart. Pei Chi had not changed from being a wife to a man. Fortunately, she always thought of Xiaoxin before going to work, so she ran upstairs to see her. Xiaoxin was still asleep. She was sleeping like a little piglet and was very fragrant. Pei Chi looked at her and leaned over to kiss the little person. The more she looked at her, the more cute she looked, like a little pig. Chapter 1159. She felt very proud. Tang Yu found it funny, but he smiled and said, of course. Pei Chi looked at him for a long time before she reluctantly left. As soon as she left, Xiaoxin opened her eyes and touched her face with her little hand. Mom kissed her. Xiaoxin opened her other hand and there was a milk bun in it. Xiaoxin looked at it and tears welled up in her eyes again. The milk bun had become hard. Downstairs, Tang Yu fastened his seatbelt and looked at Pei Chi beside him. He smiled and said, Chi, this is for you. He threw a big bag of wedding candies on her lap. Pei Chi hugged it subconsciously and looked at it carefully before she snorted, I don't want it. Shouldn't we give wedding candies to your colleagues when we get married? He turned the steering wheel easily and glanced at her. Pei Chi hugged the wedding candies and said, I don't want it. Then I'll give it to them, Tang Yu said infuriatingly. After he said that, Pei Chi glared at him, but he didn't get angry. He still smiled and said, Chi, shouldn't you let your colleagues know your husband? She bit her little finger. When did he become so amiable? She didn't understand, but when she came to Jiaran magazine, she saw his dark thoughts clearly. Was there anyone who gave wedding candies and told their male colleagues that he was Pei Chi's husband? He had told everyone in Jiaran magazine, young and old. Pei Chi was terrified. What happened to being a domineering CEO? What happened to being noble? She stared at him, and he smiled indulgently and reached out to touch her little head. Please take care of our Xiao Qi in the future. It was like he was sending his little daughter to school. How was this giving out wedding candies? It was simply feeding them dog food. The male colleagues ate dog food while giving up on their goddess. Sure enough, the goddess belonged to the CEO. Tang Yu didn't stay long. He just locked himself in the office with Lao Can and smoked 2 cigarettes before leaving. When they came out, Lao Can had his arm around Tang Yu's shoulder. Pei Chi felt that the world was a little strange. These two people seemed to have a good personal relationship. Tang Yu asked her to walk him to the elevator. She could not hide her thoughts from him at all. He became serious and coughed lightly. Chi, Lao Can and I were talking about public welfare just now. Pei Chi couldn't help but laugh. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with warmth. He had done a lot for her and given her enough freedom. He said that as long as she had enough flying, she would remember that there was a home in B City and 2 people waiting for her. However, he was such a good person, how could she bear to fly away? Pei Chi gently stepped forward and hugged his waist. Tang Yu, thank you. Thank you for waiting for me forever in your best years. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for helping me and Anlin. Even if in your heart, you never agreed with Anlin's way of doing things. She was so soft in his arms, and Tang Yu's heart softened. He reached out and rubbed her little head. Chi, I'm going back. I'll pick you up in the afternoon. What time do you get off work? 6:00. She answered obediently, and then raised her little face. He smiled and lowered his head to kiss her. Her little face was a little red, and she slowly withdrew from his arms. Tang Yu rubbed her again, turned around and walked into the elevator. Pei Chi watched him leave. She turned around and was about to enter the magazine office when a group of onlookers gathered at the door. Chapter 1160. Amy's smile was especially meaningful. Pei Chi, do you think you're married by giving out wedding sweets like this? Pei Chi replied, what else can I do? No matter what, Tang Yu has to do a striptease, or you guys have to perform a 10-minute French kiss. Amy voiced out the thoughts of the onlookers. That scene just now was so beautiful. If they had kissed, the scene would have been so sweet. Pei Chi nodded and said in a serious manner, I'll ask Tang Yu. So she returned to her seat and waited for him to return home so that she could pass on Amy's message to Tang Yu. Tang Yu only replied 5 minutes later because he had been taking care of Xiaoxin when she went to the toilet. This wedding break had been a great one. After taking care of Xiaoxin, he came out for a breath of fresh air, lit a cigarette and went back. Chi, what do you want to choose? Pei Chi looked at the message and snorted softly. It was a standard Tang Chaos-style answer. I choose you to do a striptease. Pei Chi laughed as she sent the message. He would definitely be angry. Tang Yu looked at the message and laughed. Chi, I'd rather we kiss. No way. She mischievously sent another message. You're dancing. Tang Yu sent one last message. I'll add one more condition. Give each colleague a red packet of 100,000 yuan and let them choose from 3 conditions. Hence, his wife, who had just started working, asked Amy. After Amy heard the message, she immediately roared, Tang Yu is so inhumane. Pei Chi looked at her pitifully. Amy immediately cupped her face and said shyly, I choose 100,000 yuan. Everyone voted in favor of 100,000 yuan. Pei Chi sent a message to Tang Yu and concluded, it's good to be rich. Mr. Tang, who was on his wedding leave, was making mashed potatoes for Xiaoxin. He was wearing the cartoon apron that Xiaoxin had ordered. He held his phone in one hand and sent a message, Chi, there's nothing that money can't solve. If 100,000 is not enough, then 200,000. Pei Chi lay on the table, moaning. She thought back to the night before yesterday when she mentioned the charity event. Mr. Tang had made a very difficult request. In the end, she wanted to do charity and he had to pay for the service. That night, Pei Chi earned more than 3 million yuan. Her mouth was numb. From that night onwards, Pei Chi felt that Tang Yu was a pervert. Clang. Fun. After that, Tang Yu touched her and said to her meaningfully, Chi, you have to understand a man who has been single for 2 years. Pei Chi was so angry that she bit him. But now, he was clearly reminding her of what had happened that night. Her little face felt as though it was on fire. Tang Yu called again. Chi, I've prepared a sum of money, about 20 million yuan. Do you want it? Yes, she said unwillingly. Tang Yu chuckled. Chi wants it. Then I'll reluctantly do it tonight. This time, it was a phone call. Pei Chi did not notice. She blushed and said hurriedly, I said I want money, not that. Isn't it the same? If you want me, you want money, he reminded her. Pei Chi was defeated. She felt that old Can's charity event was a fraud, especially when it came to talking about charity with Mr. Tang. After the deal was done, she hung up the phone. Then, she saw pairs of ambiguous eyes. Amy cupped her little heart. Pei Chi, is this how you and Tang Yu live? Chapter 1161. Pei Chi's face was very hot. She coughed and said, aren't we newlyweds? Amy looked at her little neck and whimpered, yeah. Newlyweds are so intense. Pei Chi gritted her teeth and pounced on her. Amy screamed. The entire Jian magazine office was filled with cheers. When Pei Chi was done, she stopped and put her arm around Amy's shoulder. She felt a little emotional. Tang Yu had arranged for her to come here probably to make her happy. Tang Yu, thank you. I'm very happy. Not because of anything else, but because I have you to love me. She was in a very excited state the whole day. In the afternoon, Pei Huan also came over with Kenshin. Poor child, she still hadn't changed her name. Pei Chi and Pei Huan were now familiar with each other. She looked at Kenshin and asked Pei Huan, what's your name? Pei Huan looked a little depressed. Kenshin. Pei Chi was stunned for a few seconds, then she laughed and said, Kenshin, Tanxing. Ah, old Can is really good at giving names. Pei Huan was a little angry. How do you know it was him? Pei Chi coughed and said, I don't think you have such a great spirit of self-mockery. Pei Chi, you're still so annoying. Pei Huan said angrily. Pei Chi was playing with Kenshin. She looked up at Pei Huan and said softly, then why do you still care so much about me? Pei Huan's eyes turned red, but she deliberately hid it and snorted, who cares about you? Come on, you've been away for 2 years and you're even more annoying than before when you come back. Pei Chi kissed Kenshin and said, I'm back now, aren't I? Pei Huan looked at her for a long time before she said in a low voice, Pei Chi, fortunately you're back. Otherwise, I'd only have this annoying father and son left in this world. Pei Chi was a little touched. It was the kind of touching that you knew that no matter where you were, there was always someone waiting for you. She looked at Pei Huan and smiled. I won't leave again. Seeing that she was a little sad, Pei Huan patted her. I heard they got married. When you get married, make me happy. Don't be so happy that we're jealous of you, understand? Pei Chi just smiled and looked at Pei Huan. She didn't remember this girl who grew up with her but didn't get along with her. Now, she only saw deep feelings in Pei Huan's eyes. Pei Chi had a feeling that the people around her right now were all people who loved her and her loved ones. Although Tang Yu did not restrict her freedom, he gave her a lot of love. He arranged a lot of love for her. She was touched, so when he came to pick her up, she sat in the car, fastened her seatbelt, and leaned over to kiss his face. Tang Yu paused for a moment, then smiled. What's wrong? Why are you so clingy? Pei Chi hugged his arm. Tang Yu, how was our movie last year? He lowered his head and pinched her little face. I thought you didn't like to go out. She was very coquettish. We're newlyweds. It's fine if we don't have a wedding, but we can't even go shopping. Of course. He kissed her forehead. Mrs. Tang, sit up straight. We're leaving. She hugged his arm and shook it like a little girl. I want to hug you. Tang Yu shook his head helplessly, but he still drove away. Chapter 1162. Chi, if you keep looking at me like that, I might not be able to drive properly. He patted her little head, his voice full of affection. She rested her little face on his shoulder. "Tang, did I sing well?" He sighed. "Not really. Mr. Tang, it's not good to be too pragmatic." She leaned on his shoulder and laughed. Tang looked ahead and smiled. "Sometimes, it's a good thing." He slowly stopped the car by the roadside. Pei Chi was a little puzzled. "Why did you stop the car? Is the car broken?" "Mrs. Tang, you broke the traffic rules." He lowered the window and pinched her little nose. Just then, a police car stopped in front of them. Two police officers got out of the car and walked towards Tang Yu's side of the car. They bowed and greeted him. "Sir." Tang Yu opened the door and got out of the car. The policeman took out the ticket. "Your female companion didn't strictly follow the traffic rules just now. She's fined 200 yuan. Here you are." "Oh yes, please show me your driver's license." Tang Yu turned around. Pei Chi had already handed him his ID. Tang Yu found it amusing and annoyed at the same time. He took the ID and handed it to the policeman. The policeman copied down the number. When he got to Tang Yu's name, he paused and looked at Tang Yu. He recognized it and was about to say something when Tang Yu said calmly, "Punish her as you like. I'll get my secretary to handle it later." The policeman smiled and saluted him. "Thank you for your cooperation." After that, he became less serious. He looked at Pei Chi in the car. "Is she your wife?" "Yes. She's still young and doesn't know much. I'll be more careful in the future." Tang Yu kept his ID and got into the car after signaling to the policeman. Pei Chi looked at him carefully. "Tang Yu, I'm sorry." He just faintly grunted in acknowledgement, not saying a word. Pei Chi pouted. "Are there any more movies?" Tang Yu looked at her. "What do you think?" She reached out and hugged him. "Yes." With that, she chuckled and nibbled on his neck. Tang Yu looked at her and finally started the car. After dinner, they went to watch a movie. She was as happy as a bird. Tang Yu also let her be. His heart was indescribably satisfied. Whether she remembered or not, she was still his Chi-Chi. When they arrived at the cinema, Pei Chi-Chi was holding a bag of popcorn as she picked out a movie. She saw Yi Liangqiu's new film. It was directed by a certain literary director, and it was a hit. "Let's watch this." She held the popcorn in one hand and hooked Tang Yu's arm with the other. She looked up and laughed. Tang Yu looked at her silently and then chuckled. "You like watching love rivals kiss scenes?" He was being vague. He heard that the bed scenes were quite popular and that Yi Liangqiu would be acting as herself in the movie with the male lead. In short, there were all kinds of rumors. Actually, the movie had been filmed 3 years ago, but it was banned later and the movie went dark. It was only recently reviewed and released. Pei Chi pouted. "She's not my love rival." With that, she laughed again. "If she likes you, then she is." Tang Yu touched his smooth chin. "Pei Chi, your words are getting better and better. I learned it from Mr. Tang." She put her little face on his arm and smiled happily. In the end, she almost hung on him and entered the movie. Tang Yu coughed lightly. "Chi, people will laugh at you if you do this." Chapter 1163. He pondered for a moment. "Chi, actually, we can use another method to feel the temperature more directly." "Tang Yu, you're getting more and more shameless." After sitting down, she lay in his arms and laughed. He laughed too and stroked her hair. "Aren't we going to watch a movie?" "How are we going to watch it?" Pei Chi cried out, "Watching a love rival scene, I have to lie in my husband's arms to feel safe." He was annoyed and amused at the same time. He patted her and focused on watching the movie. The funniest thing was that the person who wanted to watch the movie was sleeping the whole time. He pinched her little face and she laid on the bed, saying that she was tired. Tang Yu watched the sex scene alone. After the movie ended, she woke up and asked him in a daze, "What did you see?" It ended. Tang Yu held her hand and helped her to pat the popcorn off her body. Pei Chi exclaimed, "It ended." "Yes." His tone was obviously not very good. He did not tell her that when a man watched such a movie, he would also have a reaction. It would be very interesting if his wife could cooperate. There were couples all around, but only the one in his house was sleeping like a pig. Pei Chi looked at him and said, "Tang Yu, was it good?" She still had the cheek to ask. Tang Yu reached out and pinched her little mouth flat, pulling it to both sides, making it look ugly. Pei Chi grunted and glared at him. Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse. "Next time, play it again at home." "No." She buried her face in his arms. "I won't let you look at anyone else." Tang Yu hugged that little thing and his heart softened, an indescribable feeling. After a long time, he said softly, "Pei Chi, don't look at anyone else, okay?" She stared at him, and so did he. After a long time, they both laughed. "Tang Yu, let's go eat skewers." She hugged his arm. "Let's go eat rabbit." Tang Yu's expression was a little complicated. He coughed lightly and said, "Chi, are you sure you want to eat rabbit? I ate it with Amy and the others last time. It was especially delicious. The spacey bunny is the best." She swallowed her saliva as she spoke. Tang Yu looked at her with an infuriating gaze. Even if he didn't eat it, if she ate the bunny and he kissed her when they got back, it would be equivalent to him kissing the bunny's corpse. Thinking about it, Tang Yu sighed. In the past, Pei Chi didn't eat these. Pei Chi pulled him out of the cinema and pointed in a direction. "There's a snack bar over there. It's delicious. Let's go eat." Tang Yu secretly made a decision. He would do it tonight. He would not kiss her. She would love him, but he would not soften his heart. It wasn't far, so they walked there. When crossing the road, he held her little hand as if he was holding a child. On the opposite side of the road, a black car was parked by the side of the road. Qin Anlin was sitting in the back seat, and Yi Liangqiu was next to him. The car window was lowered, and Qin Anlin's eyes were fixed on Tang Yu and Pei Chi. Yi Liangqiu's voice was indifferent. "They are a good match." Qin Anlin did not say anything, but his eyes were still on Pei Chi. Most of her weight was leaning on Tang Yu. She looked very happy. Qin Anlin looked at them silently, took out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked slowly. Yi Liangqiu reminded him, "You just got out of the hospital. It doesn't matter." He smiled bitterly and was about to roll up the car window, but his eyes stopped. Because Pei Chi saw him. Chapter 1164. Pei Chi was stunned at first, then she ran over like a happy puppy. When she let go of Tang Yu's arm, Tang Yu felt a little melancholic and a little disappointed. And so did Yi Liangqiu. The relationship between Pei Chi and Qin Anlin was very subtle. It was a special existence. No one could destroy it. Pei Chi ran over. Before she reached them, Tang Yu had already walked over quickly and held her hand. "You're walking so fast. Don't you know how to be safe?" His tone was reprimanding, but it was also filled with endless affection. At least, Qin Anlin felt his teeth ache when he heard it. When he opened the car door and got out, Pei Chi saw Yi Liangqiu. She thought to herself, now that they're together, it seems that what Anlin said about marriage is true. Pei Chi waved her little paw at Yi Liangqiu and then looked at Qin Anlin. You just got out of the hospital and you're already smoking. Qin Anlin immediately threw the cigarette butt away and put it out with his calfskin shoes. Then, he looked up and looked at Pei Chi. Are you here to watch a movie? Yeah. Pei Chi waved her little paw at Yi Liangqiu again. This time, Yi Liangqiu had to come out. She nodded at Tang Yu and said gently, what do you think of it? It's my first time in an indie film. Pei Chi was a little embarrassed because she had been sleeping the whole time. Fortunately, Tang Yu helped her out. She has a low tear threshold and kept crying with her head buried. She probably doesn't even know what she's watching. Yi Liangqiu's gaze landed on Pei Chi's little face. After a while, she smiled and said, I see. It's so beautiful. It's so touching. Pei Chi clasped her little heart. Yi Liangqiu smiled and looked at Qin Anlin. Then we'll go first. Mu Yun is still waiting for us at home. Qin Anlin had no objection. He held the car door and let Yi Liangqiu get in. After she got into the car, he got into the car himself. His gaze fell deeply on Pei Chi's little face. That gaze made Tang Yu's heart ache. Pei Chi waved her little paw again and watched their car leave. Tang Yu coughed lightly. Bunny, do you still want to eat? His mood now was quite complicated. He would rather she go to eat the rabbit than look at the rear of Qin Anlin's car like this. Pei Chi turned around and held his hand. She said briskly, of course we're going to eat. She ran in front and he quickly followed behind. He shook his head. This foodie. She was the one who gave birth to Xiaoxin. That was not wrong at all. Tang Yu did not eat the rabbit meat here, but when he went back at night, he still tasted the spicy rabbit. He frowned. Why do you like this taste so much? Pei Chi wrapped her arms around his and kissed him. Should we change it to 5 spice next time? He smiled helplessly and kissed her little mouth. After that, he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her again and again. When Pei Chi left, he bit her little mouth and said in a low voice, Chi, I think I also like the taste of bunny. Let's eat together next time. She smiled and climbed into his arms. She kissed his thin lips and murmured, Tang Yu, I want to turn you into spicy bunny. Finally, there was the spicy ham, indescribable. After that, Tang Yu patted her little head. I forgive you for falling asleep while watching the movie. Actually, it was quite good. She was so energetic now that she had fallen asleep. However, in the end, Pei Chi's expression was a little thought-provoking. Spicy bunny was not that delicious. Can you guess the reason? Chapter 1165. Early in the morning, the room was quiet and beautiful. Pei Chi was in a deep sleep. Even Tang Yu slept a little later because of his newlywed indulgence. In such a quiet time, a little person hugged a small pillow and tiptoed into the room. Then, she decisively climbed onto the bed, lifted the quilt, and bravely crawled into the room. Xiaoxin was nestled in her parents' arms. She felt so happy. Her little belly rolled around, and after a roll, she pulled open her mother's bathrobe. Although Tang Yu had bathed Pei Chi and it smelled good, Xiaoxin still smelled a fragrant smell. It was the smell of rabbit, a spicy smell. Xiaoxin took a few bites, and her expression was especially satisfied. Pei Chi woke up from the pain. When she looked down, she saw a small black head. She smiled. Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin howled and reached out to hug her mother's neck. Pei Chi hugged the little fellow and placed her hand on her little butt. She felt that it was chubby. This little fellow was really well taken care of. Hugging the little person, she was too sleepy and fell into a deep sleep. Xiaoxin was left there, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws. Xiaoxin wants to eat rabbit. Let's eat your father. He tastes better, Pei Chi said in a daze, voicing out her inner thoughts. Xiaoxin raised her head. Her curly hair and round little face had a hint of confusion. Then, she crawled into her father's arms. Everywhere, there was the smell of spicy rabbit. Xiaoxin licked Tang Yu contentedly, like a puppy. When she kissed his lips, Tang Yu woke up. He thought it was Pei Chi and was about to kiss her deeply. But when he opened his eyes, it was actually Xiaoxin. Tang Yu lay down and said in a soft voice, Xiaoxin, do you still want a younger brother or sister? Xiaoxin did not care about this. She happily licked him while calling out for spicy rabbit. Tang Yu lay down and let the puppy lick him. Then, he turned his face and looked at Pei Chi. His lips curled up slightly. She, too, looked at him and smiled. At this moment, she was so happy. She gently placed her hand in his palm and gazed into his black eyes. After a long while, she softly said, what about Xiaoxin? Tang Yu closed his eyes and said impatiently, let her eat it. She'll be well behaved in a while. She smiled and reached out to hold his hand. This time, she would not let go of him again. She would not make him wait again. Tang Yu, I love you, she mouthed. In fact, he had never told her, at least not after she lost her memory. However, she knew that he loved her very much, so she didn't mind telling him first. His pupils constricted, and then he ignored his little heart and turned sideways to hug Pei Chi. He hugged her tightly. Chi. She was obedient. Everything was perfect. She waved her little paw, bunny, bunny. Poor little girl. She did not know that she had been treated as a milk bunny by Yi Muyun. She had already become food and had to eat bunnies. In the end, she became a bunny brand milk bunny. Tang Yu hugged Pei Chi and laughed hoarsely. His fingers reached out to rub Xiaoxin's hair. Pei Chi frowned. She's so noisy. Tang Yu coughed lightly. You gave birth to her. You can't despise her. Pei Chi also went to rub Xiaoxin's hair. Tang Yu suddenly took the checkbook from the bedside and wrote a set of numbers for her. 6 million. Chapter 1166. Pei Chi let out a cry and buried herself in his arms. The little heart between them was squeezed into a flat heart. She stretched out her little paws with difficulty and waved them around. Tang Yu smiled and carried the little fellow out and kissed her forehead. Do you want a younger brother or sister? Xiaoxin nodded adorably. I want a younger sister. Tang Yu pondered for a moment. If you want a younger sister, Xiaoxin can go back to the room. Daddy will work hard to make a younger sister, okay? In the midst of its internal conflict, it took one last look at the two spicy bunnies. It hesitated for a long time between its sister and the spicy bunnies. Only then did its chubby little body crawl down and run out. It even considerately closed the door. As soon as the door was closed, Tang Yu pressed Pei Chi down and said in a hoarse voice, Xiaoxin is so sensible. Shouldn't we work harder? Pei Chi's long hair was loose and her little face was as white as a picture in the morning light. Her bathrobe had long been in a mess. She bit her finger and her eyes were filled with tears. It seems that you haven't used that. She was too embarrassed to say the word condom, because her shyness made her look particularly charming. Of course not, he had already had a vasectomy. He said that they were going to have a child, but he was just lying to her to do it with him all the time. Tang Yu responded casually and began to kiss her. His voice was a little deep. Chi, let's have another child. She thought of Xiaoxin's cute appearance and wanted one in her heart. But, was she pregnant? He had done it so many times, but he had not used protection. However, it was always better to do it more, so Pei Xiaoqi was very cooperative. Tang Yu was very satisfied with the meal because he told her that she would easily get pregnant if she was on top of him. He coaxed her to sit on his waist. Pei Xiaoqi believed him and worked hard for an hour. In the end, she lay in his arms and breathed heavily. Tang Yu, do you think I'm pregnant now? Little fool. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to touch her. You didn't get pregnant this time. Try harder next time. He added, our Chi-Chi can't give up. Pei Chi-Chi hummed in agreement, looking very obedient. Tang Yu smiled and pulled her into his arms. Let's go shower together. Newlyweds must be indulgent, and he did it with her again in the bathroom. Pei Chi-Chi suspected that he really had some kind of arousal disorder. So a week later, when Lao Kan told her to go to the mountainous area to collect the local scenery, Pei Chi-Chi agreed with tears in her eyes. When she came back, she told Tang Yu. Tang Yu was sitting on the sofa flipping through some documents. He looked up at her and asked casually, what about me? Pei Chi-Chi knelt beside him, her voice trembling. What should we do? Tang Yu put down the magazine and reached out to hold her sharp little chin. He smiled. If you leave, what about our sex life at night? Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She looked around and saw several servants preparing dinner in the dining room. She lowered her head and bit his finger angrily. You do it yourself. Anyway, he used to do it this way. Then, she clenched her little fist. Tang Yu, as a successful man, you shouldn't think about this all the time. He let go of her and began to casually flip through the magazine with a very calm expression. Chapter 1167. Sure enough, her unscrupulous businessman had only flipped 2 pages when he looked up and said seriously, it's because I'm successful in my career that I'm pursuing other things. For example, should I work harder because I have too few children? Pei Chi-Chi couldn't refute him at all. She clenched her fists and glared at him. Tang Yu smiled again and said calmly, you've been gone for so long, 2 weeks. Chi-Chi, what do you think I should do? How can I get pregnant alone? Pei Chi-Chi squeezed out 2 words from between her teeth. Unscrupulous businessman. Tang Yu chuckled. You can go, but you can come back to make up for it. Come back to make up for it. Pei Chi-Chi really admired Tang Yu for being able to make such a shameless thing sound so reasonable. She waved her little fists and said weakly, pregnant. Doing it once a day is enough. But he forced her to do it 2 or 3 times a day. If she came back to make up for it in half a month, how many times would she have to do it every night? Did she still want to sleep? Pei Chi-Chi really felt that marrying Tang Yu was like being in deep trouble. It was so tiring. How about this? I'll go with you guys. It won't affect the birth of the child. You can do your job during the day and I'll do mine at night, he suggested kindly. Pei Chi-Chi thought about it. Forget it. Everyone's tent wasn't soundproof. If he didn't rest for the night, how would she be able to see him in the future? She glared at him for a long time before she snorted softly. I'd better come back to make up for it. She always felt a little dejected. She felt that her status with Tang Yu was too low and that she was humiliating the country. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to touch her little face. Chi-Chi, I'll wait for you to come back. Having said that, Big Boss continued to read the magazine. Pei Chi-Chi clenched her little hands. Why do you still have such a long marriage leave when you're in charge of 3 companies? You can ask for it too. But are you sure you want to apply for marriage leave? Tang Yu smiled again. Marriage leave is very tiring. This is my experience. Pei Chi howled again and fell into his arms. Her voice was a little soft. Tang Yu, can I return it? He sat on the sofa, his fingers gently twirling around her hair. He was especially gentle. Chi, is it that easy to take my money? Pei Chi slumped to the ground, cursing all 8 generations of Lao Can's ancestors in her heart. Tang Yu smiled and brought her to dinner. Xiaoxin is not here tonight, eat more. Pei Chi was already familiar with his tricks. She clenched her fists. She was not going to sleep tonight. Looking at her indignant expression, Tang Yu smiled. Chi, do you really feel that bad? I remember when you were excited, you would beg me not to end it. She buried herself in his arms and couldn't listen to him anymore. Unexpectedly, this night, he didn't torture her like before. Instead, he just gave it to her gently for a long time, about 2 hours. It was very gentle. His eyes were so gentle that they almost dripped water, and his movements were even more gentle. He kissed her, praised her, and whispered words of love in her ear. That night, Pei Chi was a little immersed. It felt like a wedding night. Although she didn't indulge herself too much, she still went to bed very late because he hugged her and said a lot. Chapter 1168. Early the next morning, when Pei Chi woke up, Tang Yu was already gone. But there was a slight sound in the living room. She got out of bed and walked out barefoot. Xiao Ran came early in the morning with 2 secretaries. She was talking to Tang Yu. This is not bad. It tastes good. Xiao Ran said professionally, Chi should be able to eat it for 3 days. Tang Yu reached out and took out another kind. Have you confirmed the manufacturer of this spicy rabbit? Is it safe? Xiao Ran held back his laughter. Safe. Absolutely safe. The 2 secretaries also had a hard time holding back. Pei Chi went out for a walk and their boss acted as if it was his own child going to a summer camp. But thinking about it, he must have been so careful because he had lost it once. Xiao Ran counted the food that Pei Chi was going to take away. There was a total of 10 kilograms in a big backpack. Pei Chi was at the door. I can't carry it. Tang Yu looked back at her. After making sure that she was dressed properly, he said lightly, Don't you have Lao Can? Xiao Ran nodded at Pei Chi. Then we'll go first. Chi, have a good half a month. Looking at the poor child's face, it was obvious that she had indulged herself too much. She must be very happy to leave the clutches of her boss. Pei Chi nodded. Thank you. Let's go for coffee when we come back. Xiao Ran smiled and went out with Secretary 2 and Secretary 3. At the door, Secretary 2 couldn't help but say, Boss really dotes on Pei Chi. He treats her like a child. Xiao Ran agreed. Actually, Chi is quite good like this. Boss likes her no matter what. Secretary 3 told the truth. Her looks have always been good. Look at her. She has always been like this. And this time, she looks even more girlish. The 3 of them looked at each other with an indescribable tacit understanding. In the living room, Pei Chi was sitting. She opened her bag and looked at this and that. She was quite happy. They were all her favorite foods. However, Lao Can was suffering. It must be very heavy to carry 20 caddies of things. Chi, have fun. Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her. Go get changed and have breakfast. I'll take you there later. Pei Chi nodded. After washing up, she went downstairs. Tang Yu was already sitting there. For the first time, he didn't read the newspaper. Instead, he fed Pei Xiaoqi and sent him out. There were more than 10 people in the group, but only Pei Chi had a parent send her off. She was ridiculed for a long time. That was the itinerary. They drove all the way to Xingqing, parked the car at the foot of the mountain, and hiked up. The mountain took half a day. With Lao Can taking care of her, Tang Yu was not worried. He was just worried that she would not be used to her delicate skin. Lao Can silently looked at the bag in Tang Yu's hand. He silently took it and made a gesture of 2 million for one carry. Tang Yu exchanged a look with him. It was a deal. Pei Chi got into Lao Can's car. Tang Yu stood and watched the car drive away. After a while, his Chi leaned against the window and waved her little paws at him. Tang Yu, wait for me to come back, make up for it. Even before they left, she was already starting to miss him. Pei Chi was such a good-for-nothing. Tang Yu smiled. He put one hand in his pocket and waved the other at her. He sighed in his heart. It was like his own child was on a trip. He always missed her. Chapter 1169. Pei Chi glanced at him. Old Can, now I know why you and Tang Yu get along so well. Because they were equally frivolous and shameless. Old Can just smiled. He probably understood what she meant. After driving for more than an hour, Pei Chi was almost done with what she wanted to say. She was a little sleepy and wanted to sleep. Old Can took a sip of Red Bull and said in a rough voice, sleep for a while. It's a long way. We still have 8 to 9 hours to reach Xingqing. Pei Chi lay down, but she couldn't fall asleep. She took out her phone and sent a message to Tang Yu. What are you guys doing? The other side immediately replied. They were giving Xiaoxin a bath. She had a poop just now and it was very smelly. Pei Chi laughed. She suddenly missed them very much. She had a feeling that she wanted to drive the car back, but that would be very spineless. She thought about it and gave up. Pei Chi chatted with Tang Yu for a while. Sometimes he replied quickly, and sometimes only once every 10 minutes. He was probably blowing on Xiaoxin's hair. After chatting for a long time, Pei Chi fell asleep. She hugged her phone and slept soundly. When they passed by a red light, Old Can leaned over and took her phone. He sent a voice message. She's asleep. These 4 simple words made Tang Yu's heart feel very comfortable. He smiled. Xiaoxin was very demanding to help his little girl braid her hair. As a father, he didn't have much experience, so it was still ugly after a long time. Xiaoxin suddenly burst into tears. Her cries were earth-shattering, as if it was a very big deal. But for a little girl, it was a big deal. Tang Yu took a long time to coax her. His heart was sweet and sour at the same time. He turned around and listened to Old Can's words, as if Pei Chi was by his side. Xiaoxin's delicate little face was as delicate as a painting. She blinked her watery eyes and asked Tang Yu, when will Mama come back? About 10 days, Tang Yu said and sighed. He was a newlywed man, and he had only been with her for a few days. Before he tasted her, she had already left. This lass must have wanted to leave long ago. Tang Yu smiled helplessly and hugged Xiaoxin. Daddy will take you to eat ice. The little girl with the ugly pigtails clapped her hands. Yes, yes. Daddy is the best. In the end, Tang Yu went to the ice room with his little heart. There, he met Yi Liangqiu and Yi Muyun by chance. It was rare that little Muyun was not hospitalized. He was sitting in the ice room. When he saw Xiaoxin, his eyes brightened. Originally, we were very happy, but when we saw Yi Muyun, we were so scared that tears welled up in our eyes. Our plump little body twisted on Tang Yu's shoulder, and our little but faced Yi Muyun, Xiaoxin didn't want to be eaten. Tang Yu's heart softened. He was amused and angry at the same time. He reached out and patted his little daughter. Cher, how can you do this? Yi Muyun's eyes lit up again. So little Munchkin's name was Cher, not Xiaoxin. Schwa was quite pleasant to the ears. It was as if she was placed in his mouth and melted like snow. In short, Yi Muyun always thought of eating. It was rare that Xiaoxin didn't listen to Tang Yu. She twisted her little body and ignored him for a long time. Chapter 1170. Tang Yu also nodded slightly, and with Xiaoxin, he sat in another seat. Since Pei Chi wasn't here, he definitely wouldn't have too much contact with other women. Even if he knew them, according to Tang Yu's personality, he wouldn't sit together with them. Xiaoxin was quite happy, and faced Yi Muyun, who was a few tables away. Ow ow ow, come and eat me. You can't eat me. Yi Muyun looked at the little heart that was grinning from ear to ear and smiled faintly. She was young, but her little face had calmness beyond her age. Tang Yu's heart was bleeding. Why did he and Chi give birth to such a silly and sweet child? Xiaoxin was conquered by the delicacies, and she ate very happily. And Yi Muyun looked at the way she ate with relish and smiled slightly again. Eat more, and the more you eat, the faster you grow. When you grow up, you can eat it all in one bite. As Xiaoxin ate, she peeked at Yi Muyun. His gaze was really scary, and Xiaoxin started crying as she ate. Papa, he wants to eat me. Tang Yu's gaze swept across the little radish head opposite him. As a man, he keenly captured Yi Muyun's interest in Xiaoxin. The corner of Tang Yu's mouth slightly hooked up into a faint smile, and he said calmly, how could that be? He wants to eat the dessert in your little bowl. Xiaoxin blinked her teary eyes. Really? Tang Yu smiled. Really? He looked at Yi Muyun with a warning. Boy, if you want to chase after my little girl, come back in 15 years. Under his stern gaze, little Muyun actually didn't shrink back, but looked straight at him. The gazes of an adult and a child met in the air, igniting a flame, and finally returning to calmness. Yi Muyun looked at Yi Liangqiu and said calmly, Mom, let's go first. Dr. Zhang is going to check on you later. This child is so calm that he doesn't look like a 7-year-old child. Yi Liangqiu is gratified and a little sad. She nods and asks the assistant to pack a dessert similar to Xiaoxin's. She thinks that Muyun looks at Xiaoxin because he wants to eat the same kind of dessert as Xiaoxin. Until they left, Xiaoxin nestled in her father's arms, tears still lingering in her eyes. This little brother is so scary. Every time I see him, I cry. Be careful not to be eaten. Tang Yu was amused. He reached out and stroked his daughter's hair. His voice was a little hoarse. With Daddy here, he wouldn't dare to eat Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin blinked. Really? Of course it's real. Tang Yu patiently wiped the little girl's mouth clean and said in a gentle voice, how about we go to Grandma's house to play later? Xiaoxin suddenly became happy again. Zhao Yan is much cuter than the little brother just now. Tang Yu smiled. That's because little Zhao Yan doesn't want to eat you. He brought Xiaoxin to Lin Yun's place. The two children had a good time. Tang Yu chatted with his mother. Because Xiao Yi was not around, the mother and son were even more carefree. Lin Yun said somewhat reproachfully, you didn't bring Chi with you when you just got married. She gave birth to a total of 2 children. One was Tang Yu, and the other was little Zhao Yan. Both were male. Chi and Xiaoxin were now the same. Lin Yun raised them like daughters. When she heard that they were going to the mountainous area of Xingqing, Lin Yun glanced at Tang Yu. She's so delicate and expensive. How can you bear to let her go to the mountains? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.